Hello and welcome to yet another edition of A Face the Nation. I am your host, Ian Wambe, and on this particular program, you know that we bring important guest decision makers, policy makers, those in high positions who make the decisions, and we want to understand if decisions are not being made, who is responsible. If progress is not being made, who is supposed to be making sure that there is progress, and we always make sure we bring these very important guests. And on this particular edition, we do have the PEMSEC, that is Engineer Tafadzwa Muguti, a Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Presidential Affairs and Devolution in the Office of the President and Cabinet. And we want to understand what exactly do they do, how far have they gone in as far as tracking progress. Permanent Secretary, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Let's start with the key important, when we say your ministry narration, devolution. It's a word that has been said over and over again, especially with this second republic. Can you explain what is devolution?
So Chapter 14 of the Constitution, Ian, is very clear in terms of Devolution Act, the devolution precepts of the country. As you know, Zimbabwe is a unitary state, and what we do have is 3 levels of governance within the Constitution inscribed. The first one being central government, the second one being provincial government, and the last one being local government. So as far back as 1983, all these principles were always put in place, but thankfully to the new constitution, it has allowed us to be able to have a clear direction that this country, whilst it's still unitary, still has the 3 provisions. Now, any country has got a legislative side and a government side. I'll start off first with the executive side. The executive side, central government, is basically coordinated well by the cabinet. At provincial level, we have the Provincial Development Committee, which is chaired by the Minister of State for Provincial Affairs and Devolution. And lastly, we have the Local Development Committee, which in this case, be it RDC or local authorities, chaired by the town clerk or the CEO. Now, when we go to the legislative, these are people who have been appointed through elections. We have Parliament, which is still at that level of central. And then at provincial, we have the incoming provincial councillors. And lastly, with the local councillors. So it's very important for our viewers to understand that Zimbabwe, as it is, has made pragmatic steps towards establishing those 2 pillars, clearly articulating the executive branch and clearly articulating the legislative structure in terms of devolution.
So when you look at what is happening in Zimbabwe now, is devolution the much-awaited game changer?
Devolution is the much-awaited game changer. According to the United Nations, devolution can be spelled into 3 parts. The first one being that governments can adopt a decongestion model where we feel that we now have a lot of nurses in Harare metropolitan province. Let's move more resources to other provinces. Or in this particular ministry, it has now grown, be it Home Affairs, be it Zimbabwe Private Police, wherever. Let's move more. That's decongesting the center. The other model, of course, is decentralization, where government can wake up in the morning and decide that, well, okay, we used to have birth certificates done at Makombe. Let's decentralize that Chitungwiza can also do birth certificates. Let's decentralize that Chiwota can also do. That's another form of devolution. But the context that Zimbabwe has gone for is the pragmatic approach of ensuring that His Excellency is saying power to the people. We're not saying that they're going to be coming up with new laws, but we're saying that they can be part of the decision making. Let me take you back to 1982, 1983. In those instances, I don't know how old you were. But
you would want to know, trust me.
Yeah.
Right.
But if you go to during those days, I remember as a young man, I'm still young, of course, but I remember as a young boy, my grandfather used to take me to something called Vidiko, as we expressed in Shona language, Vidiko, which is Village Development Committee. And as we were growing up in primary school, we knew that each time you see the traditional leaders and all the elders sitting under a tree and discussing about developmental matters, they were discussing it at a village perspective. In the city, they used to have what is called Wadco. And it meant that decisions made within the city or made within the village would basically be the bottom-up approach. And it allowed governments to be able to hear the voice of the people. It allowed government to be able to understand and appreciate the magnitude, or in other cases, the payload of some of the challenges that may be coming across. So we are saying that with this devolution agenda that the president has set across, it's starting off first by the amendments to the Provincial Council and Administration Bill. What we had in the past was that the Provincial Council's bill was also going to incorporate MPs, which we have now put out. the structure of it has to be more economic than political. It has to be more developmental than administrative. And that's where, thankfully, the Cabinet Committee on Legislation is working flat out with the Office of the President and Cabinet and the Ministry, of course, of Local Government and Public Works to ensure that what we have together with all stakeholders is something that can spur development.
But P.S., you mentioned power to the people, what His Excellency is saying. And there's talk conversation around devolution funds, and there's that approach to say, can people now make decisions on what they want? How effective are the options being presented to the people to say, we want this? Is it not just for public appearance where we say, people have decided to do this? Are they really having a voice that is yet and determine the actual projects we're saying?
Let me explain it this way. In any country, the government always sets up interfaces. Yes. And the first legislative interface for any resident, note I'm using the word resident, right, because we're talking about your ward. Mm-hmm. For any resident is your councillor. Mm-hmm. That's the first interface of how governments ensure a democratic process allows any resident within a given ward to have an interface. Mm-hmm. So be that bins are not being collected, be that the service is poor, you've got someone you can interface with for service delivery.
At local level.
At local level.
Right.
The second local level interface is the Member of Parliament, where you're now saying, within this context of society, there are certain laws which are now archaic. There are certain laws which are now redundant. There are certain laws which are not pragmatic anymore with the global world order where it is going. Mm-hmm. You can lobby this as citizens with your Member of Parliament. Right. So as government, we are operating on the principles of central government, provincial government, and lower government. Right. So there's no way as government we're going to come from central government and come and discuss issues at ward level. Mm-hmm. That's why we need the local government to be speak and span, to be well in order, so that at the end of the day, we know that they're engaging people. When we disperse devolution funds, which, by the way, I would like viewers to understand, devolution funds, the Constitution says a minimum of 5% of the consolidated revenue account. In other words, it's a minimum of 5% of all the taxes that government has collected. And that money is shared across 92 local authorities. However, the formula by our forefathers was done in such a way that we ensure that there's no marginalization or social dysfunctionality. So as a result, you'd find that a bigger piece of the cake of across the 92 local authorities normally goes to RDCs, the rural district councils. Why? Because they don't have much infrastructure compared to the towns and the cities, and we want to bridge the gap. Having said that, we still have a situation where when we release this 5% across 92 local authorities, it is the understanding of central government that the local government is engaging their communities, in engaging their residents. So councillors are supposed to sit down with their residents and say, what do you want us to do? And the full council, which is the legislative making body of bylaws within the local government aspect, in this respect, City of Harare, would then say, with all these issues, what is the priority? Where can we use devolution funds? Our main mandate is to then deliver those funds directly to the local authority, and they implement what the people have asked for. However, let me make it also categorically clear. We do not develop a nation with devolution funds. Local authorities provide services and develop their communities with the revenues that they collect.
Are devolution funds complementary?
Devolution funds, according to the Constitution, are complementary to existing revenue streams. So we still expect Harare Local Authority, we still expect Chitungwiza, Bulawayo, Mutare, all the 92 local authorities to be accountable for the revenues that they've collected. We still expect you, the citizens, to pay your rates and taxes, to pay everything that you need to pay. But the challenge that we then have is that we're operating with 30% of the formal sector right now.
Engineer, I might have to cut you there, but we are going to resume, especially on the issues around the funds. What are they being used for? Have you been consulted by your local leaders? Your voice being heard in terms of the projects you want to see? We get the answers in the second segment. Stay with us. We are going to take a short break. Thank you so much for staying with us. This is Face the Nation. We're still with Permanent Secretary Engineer Tafadzwa Muguti. Was explaining in terms of devolution, what are the statistics saying, what is the law saying, and how can we understand what this money is supposed to be used for. And you, Engineer, before you went for the break, you were explaining in terms of that 30%, only 30% are paying their taxes. That means 70%.
It's actually generous. It's 30% from our estimates across all provincial economies that are paying tax. And so as a result, it means 70% of this country is being carried by a few. So what we are asking local authorities to do is do not complain if the funds are less when you're encouraging informal business within your communities. Because every single enterprise or any single venture is supposed to be contributing towards the fiscus.
So let's get this clear, Engineer. You say that at least 30%, around 30% are paying, are obliging. 70%, that's a big chunk.
That's a big
and
chunk.
This is a huge amount you're talking about that can be used to develop our local communities. What therefore needs to be done by who to ensure that these 70% will also pay their taxes?
The first thing that we need to understand is that as central government puts laws in place.
Right.
There are only two arms of government, in this country, which are allowed to levy, to tax, and to charge fees. And that is local government and central government. Right. Now, having done that, it is therefore imperative that all the bylaws that the local authorities have put in place, which are subservient to the National Act, should then be followed through for enforcement. What we are seeing in the case of City of Harare, even sometimes in Bulawayo, is a classic act of lack of enforcement of those bylaws which are subservient to the National Act. There is no law which is economic, which has been placed by the government of Zimbabwe and the people of Zimbabwe, which does not have a ripple effect on the development of our economy. So, instance, if we are just blasé and enjoying the level of mediocrity of having vendors all over the streets, you starting your business at any corner, advertising billboards at any level that you want, this level of disorder that we're witnessing right now, guaranteed we're going to have revenue leakages. And the major revenue leakage is tax and levies. So that's why you find that the revenue streams for local authorities across the 92 are shrinking. That is a clear sign that there's no enforcement which is taking place.
So is it safe then to say some of these local authorities are then relying on the devolution funds to do the joti that this entire revenue should be doing?
Exactly. So what we now have seen is when local authorities are failing to perform their service delivery duties, they're now pointing to central government in His Excellency, saying that we're not getting devolution funds. No. Devolution funds are icing on the cake. Bake your cake. And so what we're simply doing is simply making that there are those special projects in a social nature. We only allow devolution funds to be used for social natures. So that means clinics, primary health care, education. Sometimes we're looking at social amenities, other social like marketplaces for people to sell, and to a great extent roads, but roads which lead to these facilities, social markets, hospitals, clinics, all these things, schools and so forth. What we can't appreciate is the fact whereby we have local authorities over the last 5 years have not publicly disclosed their set of accounts, and yet they're still crying foul over devolution funds.
And one could be wondering then, Engineer, honestly, when such these problems, these local authorities are not functioning as they should be, what becomes the course of action? Government can't really afford to fold in and say they must supposed to be doing this.
No.
Yeah.
The Constitution is very clear. At a point when any local authority and government deems to see that they've neglected their duty or failed to perform their duties, government is allowed to take back those powers. So it is very possible for the government to wake up in the morning and run the city of Harare. It is very possible for us as government to wake up in the morning and run Mutare City if they fail. So where we are, you have seen His Excellency, he has expressed within the confinements of the laws, appointed a commission to find out, because it's not a matter of just jumping into the hole. It's a matter of finding out. There are steps and stages. And we hear the cry of the people of Harare to say central government is letting us down. But we are on it. And what we've done so far, with the wisdom of His Excellency, is make sure that He has appointed a commission. And that commission, as you've heard, every testimony that has been spoken, right from the mayor to the last person, has been a docket which we've been opening with the police. So every testimony, there's a crime which was committed, and we'll deal with it decisively. But what we'd like to assure the citizens of Zimbabwe is that devolution funds are not an scapegoat for local authorities not to collect your bins, for local authorities not to address your water shortages, for local authorities not to fix their potholes. No. As long as you're paying your taxes, we still expect to see the pothole fixed. Let devolution funds come and say, oh, by the way, we have women who are walking so far away. we need to build a clinic. Use the devolution funds for that. Oh, by the way, in this digital age, we need a digital library for our communities in Kuadzano, etc. We build that with devolution funds. Oh, by the way, a good example is the road which links Bulawayo and Victoria Falls. Right. A great candidate for devolution funds. Not only is it linking families to families, it's linking communities to communities. It's also linking markets to markets. Right. There are people who are growing things in those areas who come and sell their wares in Bulawayo and vice versa. And just unlocking that is part of social initiatives that the province, in this case, would have taken note.
Right, Piers, let's move on to talk about decentralization. We spoke about devolution and decentralization, that provinces should be able to do things in their provinces. And we know Zimbabwe is obviously backed by agriculture and mining. These are the two key economic pillars we've seen in NDS 1, now obviously going to NDS 2. Their province, which are still coming to Harare to sell their agri-produce. What needs to be done to empower provinces to have their markets strong enough so that they don't have to travel to the capital city?
What makes us all think that tomatoes are only eaten in Harare?
Right.
So we should be able to say, as a province, you now have your own GDP. Create your own markets, create your own industry, create your own uptake. A good example, Mashonaland East. They can wake up in the morning and set up a tomato puree plant. Once they set up a tomato puree plant, I can guarantee you we're not going to see any tomatoes being sold in Macheke and Headlands, because everything is now heading towards the plant. So it's very possible for provinces to create through their provincial economic development plans strategic ways of how they can create their own value chains. Let me give you another example, Matebele North. Right. Almost every single teak or Lupani trees or furniture that you're seeing, all the timber is being ferried away right from Lupani to Harare for manufacturing of world-class furniture. But we've got electricity in Matebele North. What stops us to lure such investment back there? In fact, it cuts by 30 to 40% our production costs.
That's the question I would want to hear the answer from you. Why is that not happening?
No, so far I can tell you that we've done tremendous work. The first thing that we've done is that as government, we've released 590 civil servants across 10 provinces. And those civil servants are now sitting in the offices of ministers of state, which traditionally had a maximum of 5 employees, right, who were all just to support the minister on their political and administrative duties. We've also done a paradigm shift, and His Excellency has directed that all ministers of state have a paradigm shift, which is basically being from administrative and ceremonial to economic development champions. And so you would find right now, we are now measuring the GDP of every province. And now there's a race to see which province is actually getting more. What we've also done is we've disaggregated basically the GDP for metropolitan province Bulawayo and Harare, because you will understand that other retail markets and big companies which had head offices in Harare would do production in Mashonaland East but record the financial figures in Harare. So we've also disaggregated so that we can actually be able to see where is the development aspect coming from. But we've also recruited economists, and we've actually successfully trained most of the economic development officers in the provinces. We've trained them through the World Bank and IMF, and we are quite confident through ZIDA that now we're starting to see investment prospectus taking shape in each province, starting to take ownership. So the race is on.
Structures we have had, but we want to know the progress, tracing the progress. Of course, yes. We are going to take another short break. When you come back, the engineer will be explaining in terms of the major project that we can say, devolution, point at A, B, C, and D. This is what has been done. We hear from engineer when you come back from the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back, third and final segment of our Face the Nation as we speak to engineer Tafadzwa Muguti, and he has been explaining in terms of devolution what it is, what has been done by the government. Now, let's see issues around the progress. Engineer, you spoke well of the structures, the laws, the government, what is supposed to be done by who from local until we get to parliamentary level. What would you point at and say these are the major projects of the devolution project that was introduced by His Excellency?
Well, I can clearly say that currently as to date, across most rural development, most of the RDCs, right, in the rural communities, the local authorities, I'm very glad to say that we've uplifted our game in terms of building classrooms using devolution funds. We're encouraging local authorities to take that. Places like Chikomba, Zimba, and other places which were so marginalized, we've seen a number of developments coming across. Within the metropolitans like Ruwa and other places, Chitungwiza, we've increased in terms of healthcare facilities. So we've seen that help a lot. I'm also happy that most of the road maintenance, which is also being done, we've encouraged local authorities to also undertake and use devolution funds. So that has actually helped a lot. But however, we still remain concerned because some of the things that devolution funds is actually doing now, where it's supposed to come and add value, it's actually doing the entire project. Right. So we want to still see local authorities collect revenues, lure investment, and devolution funds can come in and do the aesthetics. So for example, right now, you can build a school, devolution funds can come in and furnish it, can come and put in internet connectivity and other things. But we also, when we started, we had 1 or 2 local authorities who would use devolution funds for administrative costs. Right. We do not allow that. We do not allow them to use devolution funds for that. We want them still to be able to be accountable with their funds and use their relativity towards what they would have collected.
You speak of accountability. So are there any accountability mechanisms that are set up at local authorities for the people to be able to say, so much was received, we agreed to use this much for this particular project, what happened to this money? Are there any such mechanisms at local level?
The mechanisms are there. As you know, full council meetings are open to the general public. And one of the things we've noticed is that there's not been much emphasis on local authorities inviting their residents or residents associations to attend their full council meetings because they can field questions and they can also listen and hear where the discussions are going across and they can petition. And in this regard, we are actually averse to local authorities who have closed door meetings. Right. They should have having meetings right outside where people are seeing and engaging the communities. When we came from independence, our forefathers and the building blocks, they were very clear about town hall meetings. We grew up with town hall meetings. You'd go to the local community hall and people would be gathered and the local councillors. That culture went away when corruption started. Right. Because automatically when corruption started, the councillor didn't want to be asked now to say, we've seen that ground rebora or that, the football field that we used to play is now being turned into a bottle store. Right. So the councillors started shying away. And I can clearly say that to us right now, corruption remains a big impediment to devolution and the development agenda that His Excellency has set across.
So where there is money, obviously there's a possibility for corruption, like you're saying, there's devolution money being given. Yeah. Are there any mechanisms? Of course, I know there's ZAC, there's therapy. Apart from that, is there something that has been done maybe by your ministry or by the government to ensure that whenever corruption happens?
Our ministry is right on top of it. Right. We now have, on the 5th of each month, every Minister of State is reporting into the Office of the President with relativity in terms of economic activities that you have done, social interventions that you have carried out. Also, that includes PVOs, what they are doing so that they are all aligned. Right. We're also looking at the other projects that are happening within your province. Are you now at 80% and etc.? And the relative service delivery. So we look at ratios. So for example, refuse collection aggregate. We look at obviously non-revenue water. In this regard, water that is unaccounted for tells us a percentage of our water is being distributed. We look at a number of factors which are driving a province. We're taking a province as if it's a sub-nation. So we're taking a province as if they now, because entirely they have their own economy. So what we are looking for is a situation where we are now saying to the ministers of state and we are saying to their offices, you are the provincial government, the second tier of government. As much as central government is supervising you, you now have to supervise the local authorities. As much as this Ministry of Local Government, every line minister, every minister from provincial affairs, for provincial affairs and devolution has to know the heartbeat of their province. What makes you tick? If it is the good road network, then make it work. If it is the good agricultural fields, then make it work. If it is the people themselves, then make sure there's peace and harmony and tranquility to create a conducive investment environment. But we are now talking economic development and not administrative. The other thing that we have banned, I'm using the word banned because we are trying to remove it from the minds of bureaucratic civil servants of yesteryear. It's a big word because bureaucracy in its nature, very nature, is a serious detriment to economic development, especially for developing nations. If we have a village business unit, if we have a project that we are commissioning, and it cost us $40,000 as the government, why should we then have a ceremony worth $60,000 to commission it?
I'm glad you're saying this.
No.
Right.
In the spirit of devolution and giving power to the people, gone are the days where we see a series of expensive cars driving to Dotito to officially open a bridge.
So who is responsible for
The
ensuring that these
Minister
do not
of
happen?
State is responsible for knowing every single project, commissioning projects within their jurisdiction, and to a certain extent they can even delegate to the district development coordinator or to the secretary, which is a PS level now sitting in the province, to say, can we be able to do this? But likewise, we also have to understand that time is money. And when we waste resources on certain things which are supposed to be implemented, an economy cannot grow. So these are some of the things that we are teaching. That paradigm shift is a mentality. You also have to understand that before the Second Republic, all of us had become comfortable with mediocrity. All of us had now known that if you want to see your driving skills is how many potholes you can divert. But now we're in a stage where we're saying, no, enough is enough. And His Excellency is saying that for us to achieve Vision 2030, we have to have a change of mindset. So we are also saying to central government and our colleagues within central government, allow provincial governments to sit down with their local people and come up with their own projects. Because we have seen situations where sometimes you take a cattle project, you take a chicken project to people who live cattle rearing. And you take sometimes a mushroom project to people who actually do not love to do mushrooms, don't even eat them, there's no market. So you have to hear and listen. That's how economic development prospers. You have to listen to what the citizen is saying. And by the way, political equity only comes on the ability of listening to the electorate. And that's where we are as a government.
So I'm glad we are speaking to an engineer in terms of engineering solutions, in terms of what needs to be done. You are saying something that is very brilliant in terms of making sure that people at local level have the power to decide on projects they want, and those who actually officially open and preside over these ceremonies are from the local level. So when you look at the work that your ministry does, I usually ask ministers on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate the effectiveness of what you're doing?
I can say 11 out of 10. Because from where we are, until we understand that an economy can be fast-tracked by decentralizing our fiscus, by decentralizing provincial fiscal performance, then we've got a tough road ahead. Because as we are, we need to understand first, we have 92 local GDPs, which make up 10 provincial GDPs, which then make the national GDP. So if we have this top brass approach, where we do our national fiscal performance analysis based on top counters, we take Econet, we take the Zimplats, we take the big counters, and we discard the economic activities happening within this 70% bracket who are not yet formalized, then we are not seeing a clear picture. In my view, and within my office's view, we actually think that 39 to 40 billion of our GDP is understated. Because there's so much happening within Zimbabwe right now outside the fiscus. This 39 to 40 billion is what we have recorded from our remittances to our exports and everything else that we've done. But the 70% of all those tax shops which are selling clothes, the 70% of all these community-owned businesses which are turning over $200, $300 a day, and there are thousands of them, no one is recording that revenue. So we need to basically formalize. But in order for us to formalize the economy well and reduce the 70% deficit in terms of provincial economic development, it starts at the local authority level.
Where there is so much economic
Where
activity.
there's so much activity. So the first thing is the city of Harare or whatever local authority, they need to understand that I'm not going to give you Ian a business permit unless you're registered for Zimra. I'm not going to give you unless you show me proof that you're going to be banking. I'm not going to give you unless I see that you're part of us in the fiscus.
Engineer, we certainly need an hour for this because this is a very important issue to talk about. Your last words to our viewers, our time is almost up. What would you like to say to the Zimbabweans?
I think what we can simply say is that let's brace up to develop our economy well. Devolution is not just about the devolution funds. It's about the mindset. We need to let go. We need to understand that as much as we have a central government in place which is guiding us in policy, that central government also wants us to be able to do our part. So provinces need to wake up. They need to start working harder, attracting investment, talking to the people. And the local authorities, the time for excuses is gone. We need to shape up or ship out. Thank you, Ian.
There you go. Shape up or ship out. Are the words coming through from Engineer Tafadzwa Muguti, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Presidential Affairs and Devolution, of course, explaining to us what has been done, what needs to be done, and who is responsible for all these developments we are seeing. I am your presenter, Ian Wambe. Until we meet again next time, stay tuned to ZBC TV.